We saw a cabin appear between the trees, even though it wasn't there minutes before. Jonah was the first to stop walking. He didn't say anything at first, just slowed, then stood still enough that Claire walked into his back. I almost kept going before I saw what he was staring at. The trees ahead had thinned into a narrow corridor of birch and pine. We had passed through that exact stretch not 10 minutes earlier, doubling back after realizing the marked trail had vanished beneath a spill of fallen branches. It had been empty. Now there was a cabin. It stood in a clearing that hadn't existed before, square and deliberate, as if the forest had been pressed back by careful hands. The ground around it was bare, the leaves scraped away to expose dark, damp soil. The trees formed a rough circle around the space, their trunks angled slightly outward, like they had leaned away. The cabin itself was small, one story, sloped roof, with siding darkened with age and moss. The boards looked decades old, gray and split along their grain. A faint curl of vapor drifted from the chimney. No wind carried it. It rose straight up. "That wasn't there," Claire said. Jonah let out a thin breath. "We would have seen it." We had walked this stretch twice already, arguing about whether to head back toward the creek or keep pushing forward. There had been no clearing, no chimney, no structure tucked behind trees. Now it stood squarely in our path. The air felt warmer near it. Not by much, just enough that the damp chill of the woods eased as we stepped closer. "Maybe it was hidden from this angle," Jonah said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The trees could have blocked it." Claire shook her head. "We stood right there." She pointed to a mossy rock we'd rested on earlier. There was nothing. The cabin's front window reflected only shadow. No interior visible. The glass was dusty but intact. A faint light flickered inside. Soft, yellow, like a lantern being adjusted. We froze. "Okay," I said carefully. "So someone lives here, in the middle of a restricted trail?" Claire asked. "No path, no markings." The ground between us and the cabin was disturbed. Leaves pushed aside in uneven arcs. Footprints, maybe. Hard to tell in the damp soil. The impressions overlapped, some fresh enough that the edges hadn't collapsed. A thin trail led to the door. The wood of the cabin looked ancient. Splintered edges, rusted hinges. But the metal latch on the door gleamed faintly, polished by recent use. Warm air slipped through a crack beneath the door, carrying a scent of wood smoke and something sweeter beneath it. Not rot, not decay. Something lived in. The silence around the clearing felt wrong. Not peaceful. Suppressed. No insects hummed. No birds called from the canopy. Even the distant wind that had followed us all afternoon seemed to stop at the edge of the trees. "It could be abandoned," Jonah said. "And someone's just squatting. Or we're dehydrated," Claire muttered. "And this is a group hallucination." I crouched and touched the soil near the foundation. It was warm. Not from sunlight, the canopy blocked most of it, but from something beneath, as if heat seeped outward from the cabin itself. Behind us, a branch snapped. We spun. Nothing there. When we looked back at the cabin, the door was slightly ajar. It hadn't been before. I was certain of it. Claire's breath came fast. "Did that just—" "Yes," Jonah whispered. The door creaked open another inch. No wind, just the slow, deliberate movement of old wood bending on hinges. Inside, the faint yellow light flickered again. "Someone's in there," I said. "Or something wants us to think that," Claire replied. We stood at the edge of the clearing, suspended between curiosity and the instinct to run. The door opened wider. Not all the way, just enough to reveal darkness beyond the threshold. The light inside shifted position, as if carried. Footsteps sounded from within. Soft, slow, measured, then stopped. Jonah took one step forward. The cabin shifted. It was subtle, so subtle I thought I imagined it at first. The angle of the roofline changed slightly, no longer aligned with the trees the way it had been. The front of the cabin seemed to rotate a few degrees to face him more directly. Claire grabbed my arm. "It moved." "It didn't," Jonah said, but he didn't take another step. The shadows along the cabin's edges deepened. The clearing itself seemed narrower now, the trees leaning closer in. The door swung fully open. Darkness pooled inside. A shape moved beyond the threshold, not a figure exactly. Just an interruption in the dark. A density. "Hello," Jonah called. The word vanished before it traveled far. No echo. The cabin answered with a sound. Not a voice. A creak from within, slow, deliberate, like weight shifting across wooden floorboards. Then another. Approaching. Claire took a step backward. The cabin responded. The light inside flared brighter, then dimmed. The warmth intensified, washing over us in a thick wave. The scent changed too. Less like wood smoke now. More metallic. "Okay," I said. "We're leaving." We turned. The forest behind us was wrong. The path we'd come from was gone. The trees stood in unfamiliar patterns, trunks closer together, undergrowth thicker. The mossy rock we'd rested on had vanished. We hadn't heard anything change. No rustle, no cracking branches. But the orientation of the woods had shifted. Slowly, we looked back at the cabin. It stood farther away now. Not much, just a few yards. The clearing had stretched. Or we had moved. Without walking. The door remained open. The darkness inside deeper than before. And now, faintly, I could see something at the threshold. A pair of impressions in the dirt. Not ours. Bare footprints. Fresh. Pointing outward. As if someone had just stepped from the cabin and stood there. Watching. The light flickered again. Then cut out entirely. The cabin did not disappear. Simply wasn't there anymore. The clearing remained. A raw square carved into the woods. But the structure itself had dissolved, leaving only disturbed soil and the faint warmth radiating from empty space. Jonah staggered backward. No! The trees groaned softly around us. And then, between two trunks to our left, where dense underbrush had been moments ago, we saw the edge of a wall. The cabin stood there now. Closer. The door closed. The window, now visible from this new angle, glowed faintly from within. It had repositioned itself. Not vanished. Moved. Claire's voice cracked. "It wants us to see it." The door opened again. This time slowly. Deliberately. The darkness inside seemed thicker than the woods around us. Almost tangible. A sound drifted out. Breathing. Not ragged. Not aggressive. Just patient. Waiting. The clearing felt smaller with every second. The trees pressing inward. The air heavy and close. Jonah stepped forward before either of us could stop him. The warmth intensified around him. The light inside flickered brighter, illuminating the doorway just enough to reveal the faint outline of a hallway beyond. Longer than the cabin's exterior should allow. Much longer. "Jonah," Claire whispered. He hesitated at the threshold. The air around him shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt. The cabin creaked, and the forest behind us shifted again. When I glanced over my shoulder, I saw no trees at all, just more clearing. Identical cabins. Dozens of them, each nestled in its own raw square of disturbed earth. Each with a faint light flickering inside. Each with its door slightly open. Jonah turned his head slowly toward us. Behind him, from within the cabin, came the softest whisper. Not a word, just the sound of someone testing their voice. And then the cabin door closed. Not with force, but with finality. The clearing around us snapped back to forest. No cabins. No disturbed soil. Just trees. Claire and I stood alone. The air was cold again. Ordinary. Except for one thing. At the base of the nearest tree, carved into the bark at eye level, was a small, deliberate marking. A tally. One vertical line. Fresh. The forest smelled like sulfur, and the birds began flying in perfect circles overhead. At first, I thought it was a camp stove. We were a mile beyond the marked trail, following what Jonah insisted was a shortcut toward the ridge overlook. The official path had thinned to nothing behind us, swallowed by moss and low-hanging branches. The woods here felt older, less walked. The trunks were thicker, the air heavier. Then the smell hit fully. Not wood smoke, not rot. Sulfur. Sharp and bitter, like struck matches ground into damp soil. Claire stopped mid-step, wrinkling her nose. "Do you smell that?" Jonah nodded slowly. "Could be a natural gas pocket." "In the middle of a forest?" I asked. The scent intensified as we moved forward. It didn't drift in patches like normal odors. It seemed evenly distributed, saturating the air itself. Each breath coated the back of my throat with a metallic tang. Above us, wings fluttered. We looked up. A flock of birds, starlings, maybe a dozen, circled high above the canopy break. At first, it seemed ordinary. Birds circle all the time. But these weren't drifting. They were moving in a perfect ring. The same radius, the same speed. No variation. They didn't flap. Their wings were extended, locked, gliding in a precise orbit as if tethered to an invisible track. "Thermals," Jonah said quickly. "Hot air rising." "There's no heat," Claire replied. She was right. The air felt wrong, pressurized. Thick against the ears like before a storm. But the temperature hadn't climbed. If anything, it was cooling. The sulfur smell deepened. Stronger now. My eyes watered. The birds continued their orbit. No flapping. No calls. Absolute silence from them. And then I noticed something else. The rest of the forest had gone quiet too. No insects. No rustle in the underbrush. The wind, which had been pushing lightly against our backs all afternoon, had stopped completely. The clearing ahead opened suddenly between trees, a nearly perfect circle of bare earth. Leaves pushed outward in a rough perimeter, as if something had pressed up from below and displaced them. The ground inside the circle was dark and damp, prepared, like a stage. The sulfur stench pooled thickest at its center. Jonah stepped to the edge. "It's probably just geothermal activity." "In this region?" Claire asked. "There aren't any vents." He didn't answer. The birds overhead adjusted their orbit slightly. Not in response to wind, in response to us. As we stepped closer to the clearing, their circle tightened. Still no flapping. Still no sound. They moved like parts of a machine. I swallowed hard. "They're not even correcting their flight." Claire's voice dropped. "They look suspended." She wasn't wrong. Their wings remained rigid. No micro-adjustments. No flickers of muscle. The sulfur smell thickened further, turning almost sweet at the edges, like something decomposing beneath the earth. A low vibration hummed through the ground, so faint I almost missed it. Then it grew stronger. Not an earthquake, more like a pulse. Regular, slow. The trees around the clearing shifted. Not swaying, leaning. Their trunks angled inward slightly, bark creaking as if drawn by subtle gravity toward the circle's center. "Okay," Claire said. "This is not normal." Jonah forced a laugh. "Trees grow toward light." "There's no light," she snapped. He took one cautious step into the clearing. The vibration intensified. The birds overhead dropped lower in their orbit. Still perfectly spaced. Still silent. The sulfur smell surged, sharp enough to sting my lungs. "Jonah, get out," I said. He hesitated, looking down at the soil. The ground was not just dark. It was damp in a way that didn't match the rest of the forest. Moisture beaded at the surface, then bubbled, just once. A small blister in the dirt that swelled and collapsed. The bird's orbit tightened again, now directly above the clearing. The sky seemed darker inside their circle, as if they were tracing a boundary in the air. The vibration became a pressure wave, pressing against my chest from below. Claire grabbed my arm. "It's a warning. Or a summoning," Jonah murmured. The sulfur smell grew unbearable. My eyes burned. The ground at the center of the clearing bulged upward slightly. The trees leaned further in, their shadows stretching unnaturally long despite the sun's steady position. The birds suddenly stopped. Midair. No slowing. No descent. They froze in their circular positions, suspended as if pinned to the sky. every one of them motionless. The forest held its breath. The vibration ceased. Total silence fell, so complete it rang in my ears. Then, one by one, the birds vanished. Not flew away, vanished, blinking out of existence in the exact pattern of their circle. Gone. The sky above the clearing was empty. Claire's grip tightened painfully on my arm. What just happened? Before I could answer, the air above the clearing warped. It shimmered faintly, like heat distortion. Except the temperature was dropping now, rapidly. The sulfur smell shifted, no longer rising from below, now descending. The scent thickened from above, cascading downward into the clearing like invisible smoke. The trees groaned, their trunks bent further inward, bark splitting in thin cracks. The shadows on the ground began to rotate slowly around the clearing's edge. Clockwise, Jonah stepped backward. The bulge in the soil at the center split open with a soft tearing sound. Not violently, just enough to reveal darkness beneath. Not soil, not rock, darkness, a depth that swallowed light. And from that depth came a breath. Not wind, a deliberate inhale. The sulfur stench peaked so sharply I gagged. Claire pulled me backward toward the tree line. The darkness in the ground expanded, stretching outward in a widening crack. Above it, the air shimmer intensified. Something pressed down from the sky at the same time something pushed up from below. Meeting, aligning. The clearing felt like a junction. Conduit. The trees snapped upright suddenly, as if released. The crack in the ground sealed in an instant. The air distortion vanished. The sulfur smell dissipated just as quickly. The forest sounds rushed back in, birds chirping in the distance, insects buzzing, wind brushing leaves. The clearing looked ordinary again. Just dirt and trees. No bulge, no crack. We stood frozen at the edge. Jonah swallowed. It's over. Claire shook her head slowly. I followed her gaze upward. High above the trees, barely visible against the sky, a faint ring of darker blue remained. Perfect circle. The exact diameter of the bird's orbit. It wasn't cloud. It wasn't shadow. It was absence. Like something had passed through and left a mark. The sulfur smell returned faintly on the breeze. Not from the ground. Not from the sky. From the forest behind us. We turned slowly. Between the trees, deeper in the woods, another clearing was forming. Leaves sliding outward, branches bending aside. And overhead, far beyond our reach, more birds were gathering, arranging themselves into a perfect circle.